Mayor of Clarence, Alderman Doug Chipman.
Good evening and thank you everyone. Welcome to our first meeting for the auspicious year of 2020. I'd like to call on the General Manager to recite the Council prayer to get our proceedings underway.
Thank you, Mayor. Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this Council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Clarence. Amen.
Amen. And before proceeding, I'd like to acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal community as the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on tonight and pay our respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to remind everyone the meeting is being recorded audio-visually and will be available on the website later this week. Thank you. I declare the meeting open and note that we have no apologies. Item 2, confirmation of minutes for the 2nd of December as circulated. We take them as read and confirmed. Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Mayor's communications. Firstly, I'll table the list of activities since the last key activities since the last meeting, which will appear in the minutes for this meeting. And I'll invite the General Manager to give us some details on where we are with the squash court purchase. Ben?
Thank you, Mayor. In respect to the Eastside Squash Court Squash Centre purchase, that purchase has now been completed. The closed meeting required a report back to Council, and in terms of the timing of the sale versus when the agenda came out, I'd like to put forward just simply that verbal report that the sale has been completed, and we'll minute that in the minutes of this meeting, if that's okay.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, a question through you to the General Manager. In relation to the Eastside Squash Centre, Mr Nelson, are you able to advise the public of the purchase price and also the arrangements with regard to the lease arrangements and for how much each per annum that lease amount is payable to the Clarence City Council, please?
Thank you for the question, Alderman James. The purchase price was $900,000 plus stamp duty.
Thank you.
The lease, my recollection is it's a 5-year lease or slightly shorter than 5 years. And the annual lease fee, again, approximately, if my recollection is correct, is about $5,000 per annum.
And one more supplementary. In relation to the maintenance and also the ongoing maintenance, is that in the hands of the Squash Centre, or is it in the hands of the council to maintain the property during the course of this lease?
Thank you, Alderman James. The lease is on terms that is consistent with other sporting clubs, and in respect to the building, that means that the council is responsible for the maintenance of the building structure, and the club is responsible for what I'll refer to as operational maintenance, so the everyday issues of things like lights, cleaning, minor repairs and such like are the responsibility of the club.
Okay, being no further questions on that report, moving on to item 4. The Council notes the workshops conducted, which only included the agenda briefing held on 10th of January.
I'll move that, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Bonberto, and second Alderman Pearce. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Item 5, declarations of interest of Alderman or close associate. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Thank you. Item 6, tabling of petitions. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one petition to table. It's 102 signatories requesting that Council amend the current application for a proposed development 2019/003190 at 12 St John's Circle, 9 Professors Road and 41 Wellington Street, Richmond, by reducing the number of lots proposed so as not to overburden current infrastructure and to appropriately meet community expectations. That was a valid petition, and we'll provide a report in respect to that at the next council meeting.
A question through you, Mr Mayor, to the General Manager. You mentioned that it's a valid petition. Could you please explain as to whether a petition to amend, as distinct from approving or refusing, is something that can be considered as part of the process?
Thank you, Alderman James. The petition is a valid petition in the context of the Local Government Act. In terms of a petition that can purport to seek an amendment to a development application, it can have no effect in that regard. So essentially my report will be, you can take note of it essentially as a representation, but you can't act upon it as a planning authority.
Okay, any other petitions from the floor? Moving on to item 7, public question time. We have one public question on notice from Jenny Rayner. General Manager, if we could have the answer to that, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just read the question and then the answer. The question is as follows. On the 20th of October 2019, the Sunday Tasmanian quoted Mr Jock Campbell as former Mayor of Clarence as follows: "The cost of trying to maintain the Rosny Hill for just a select few is too much for all tiers of government." This statement is clearly linked to Mr Campbell's former role as Mayor. The question was, does the current Council endorse this statement? The answer is, Council is the appointed managing authority for Rosny Hill and undertakes its statutory duties to manage the reserve for all Tasmanians. The cost of managing the reserve is subject to budgetary consideration each year in the usual way. It is not appropriate for Council to express any view regarding Mr Campbell's statement on the 20th of October 2019.
Thank you. There's nothing at item 7.3. 7.4, there's an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions without notice. If any members of the public. Mr and Mrs Marsh, you pick the order.
I've got 2 brief questions today, if that's all right. So I can do that. I've got photos here of 2 of the trees that I'm referring to in my question. There.
Yeah, I'll pass it
Thanks
round.
very much.
There's just 2 of the ones that I'm referring to.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Pass it around.
Thanks. Yeah. I have noticed a number of large dead trees located in parks and near tracks and multi-user pathways. One large dead tree in Bellary Beach Park has been cut down. One remains in Corrier Street Park. One remains beside the dune track near Lower River Street, and one remains beside the multi-user road pathway on Kangaroo Bluff. So my question is, considering that this is a community safety issue, what responsibility does the Council have for risk assessments of dead trees located in parks or near tracks or multi-user pathways? And I mean big trees, not just little dead ones.
Thank you for the question. The answer is that Council considers the safety of trees as part of its regular inspections and as notified by members of the public. If you'd like to provide us with those details, we'll have those inspected.
Yes, I've written where 2 of them are.
You mentioned a number of locations, so if you'd like to leave that list with us, we'll follow it up.
Second question.
Yeah, and I've got a photograph of what it relates to there. Permit condition 36 for Bellerive Oval's consolidation of permits 2019 states that external facing signs are not to be displayed without separate approval. My question is, has approval been granted for the external facing signs in Derwent and Church Street? If so, what is the reason for approving them?
I granted approval for those signs prior to Christmas. I can't remember the exact date, and I granted approval because I thought it was reasonable to do so in the circumstances of the events coming up.
Right, yeah, it's just, so why is that permit condition there if...
It requires...
Just because you thought it'd be okay to put the signs up?
It's there because it requires an approval to be granted before a sign goes up.
Yeah.
Without getting into the argument now, perhaps we can write to you on this one and explain the reason why.
Yes, I want to know why they were approved, not just because it's thought to be a good idea, because the permit condition must be there for a reason. It's not completely clear, I don't think, at the moment. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Victor Marsh. I live at 32A King Street, Bellerive. While monitoring the traffic management plan, just after the start of the Big Bash event at Bellerive Oval, 3rd of the 1st 20, I had to make my way through cigarette smoke in Derwent Street outside the Oval as a result of smokers disregarding the new smoking regulations. So my question is, how are the Clarence City Council ensuring that the new regulations are complied with?
Thank you for the question. Council is taking at this point in time an educative approach to enforcement of the new requirements. So we have officers in the area whenever there's a significant game on, speaking to people who are smoking and advising them and asking them to move out of the area or to put their cigarettes out. That process will continue for a period of time before enforcement starts.
So I haven't witnessed anybody yet doing that. So
we had, John, 3 or 6 people.
For you now, last time we had 4 people down there. Tonight we have 6 people down there.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of the public? Thank you. Item 8 is deputations from members of the public. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. We have one joint deputation tonight from Mr James Polanowski and Mr Phil G in respect to 58 Clay Esplanade in Cremorne.
I'll correct that. That is 12 Apple Place.
Oh, sorry, I was reading your address. 12 Apple Place. Thank you.
Before you get underway, I need to point out that under meeting regs, and I understand you appreciate that there's only 3 minutes for this joint presentation, so there'll be a buzzer at the end of the 3 minutes. Thank you.
Hello, my name is James Polanowski. I'm one of the owners behind this application. I just wanted to put my face to the name and provide you with some brief background about this project. I'm joined with my engineer, Phil G. I currently operate the 7 Mile Beach Caravan Park at this site. The campground consists of 55 powered sites, 10 unpowered sites, 8 units and 7 cabins. What we're proposing to do is replace this total of 80 sites with just 15 residential blocks. We're proposing to change the existing use of one we believe is better suited to the area. I won't rehash on all the reasons we think this should go ahead, but I've asked Phil to provide some more details on the 2 issues I know people have been interested in, stormwater and traffic.
Thanks, James. I'm representing James and his group here, and I believe this is a reduction in intensity of development. It's going from a caravan park that's quite busy down to 15 lots, which are quite large. It's one of the highest places in 7 Mile Beach, so we don't think that flooding is going to be any major issue at the site, and the site will be well drained. There is no stormwater in 7 Mile Beach, and there'll be soakage pits that will be put in place that are very similar to those designed and installed along 7 Mile Beach Road upgrade recently. With respect to wastewater, and we believe the reduction in intensity will reduce the amount of wastewater going into the site, into the ground, except for perhaps in the very low occupancy period in winter, it'll be a significant reduction in wastewater. Similarly, there will be a reduction in traffic management. There will be an improvement in the circulation of traffic in the area, and as suggested in a condition or required in a condition that's put forward for the development, there will be a footway connection to the beach.
Thank you.
In conclusion, we think this development will be positive development for 7 Mile Beach, and I ask for your full support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item 9. 9.1 is a notice of motion from Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to move that motion on notice.
Do we have a seconder, please? Alderman Blomley, thank you. Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, I'd like to start with the genesis of the motion. As you're all aware, I'm one of the Tasmanian representatives on the Australian Coastal Councils Association Management Committee. And recently the Chair advised that a New South Wales committee member, who's a farmer, saved his home, lost his outbuildings and many of his livestock. His mother's house was destroyed and his neighbour died fighting the fire. This news really brought it home to me how catastrophic these fires are across Australia, and it brought it into the spotlight for me. I suppose you'd say a personal perspective, as well as seeing and hearing the daily statistics. I believe that Clarence, as a leading Tasmanian council, needs to show its leadership and compassion now. After submitting this motion's draft, I consulted the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor and the General Manager and altered it accordingly after those discussions. As far as part 1 is concerned, the key theme is coordination and collaboration, not only in relation to restoration and recovery from these fires, but resilience plans and actions to limit death, destruction and damage in the future from similar fires. Deliberations on these two aspects should take place concurrently. As you'd probably be aware, the Prime Minister announced today that he will take to Cabinet the consideration of a Royal Commission. But inquiries need to start and finish as soon as possible. Since writing this motion, more issues additional to those that I've listed have surfaced which need to have a concerted plan for the future. As far as part 2 of the motion is concerned, the General Manager followed up for me with Hobart City Council and found that Hobart City is likely to donate $25,000. Hobart's different to us. It actually has a budgeted fund for emergency and disaster relief, and perhaps Clarence needs to consider that in our deliberations for the next budget for the next financial year. As far as donating to the Australian Red Cross Disaster Relief Fund, I believe it's a big charity which has a strong governance structure and it can mobilise help efficiently and quickly. And it's been noted time and time again that the best help in this situation is cash. As far as parts 2 and 3 are concerned, they're about supporting and caring for our fellow Tasmanians and Australians. There are many idioms that can come to mind. in this circumstance, such as what goes around comes around. You reap what you sow. Mateship. And I believe that it's about repayment. We have been helped in the past and will need help in the future. I hope that you can all support this motion and that it's a united response.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. And Mr Mayor, may I start off by saying there's not a great deal more than I can add that the mover of the motion hasn't already said, except to say, Mr Mayor, that I'd like to congratulate Alderman von Berto on this motion. It is well considered, it is compassionate, and it is totally appropriate in this current setting. The level of support that Alderman von Berto is suggesting is $20,000. If the reasons she outlined a moment ago, that too is appropriate, looking at what the contribution Hobart City Council looking to make, and indeed smaller councils around the state. This is about, Mr Mayor, the three levels of government playing our collective part, working hand in glove to ensure bushfire reparation, adaptation and mitigation. I thoroughly support the motion and I urge colleagues to do likewise.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Thank you. Look, I want to put on record that in my time on council, I've found Alderman von Berto to be both strategic and judicious in her approach to notices of motion. They don't come often, and a fair deal of consideration goes into them. And I totally support her intent, but in this instance, I'm troubled that the intent, through the steps of the intent, what the outcome will be. I would suggest that leadership would actually be holding a motion like this over until we've had a chance to talk about the ideal response in a considered way through a workshop. Why do I say this? Right at the moment, the situation's acute. It's what the Victorian Emergency Management described as the response phase, combating of an emergency and preservation of life. The preceding phase is the preventative phase, and the phase where local government as a nation, as a system, as an organism can do its best is in the recovery phase, and that's weeks, months and years later. And that is described as the assisting of person and communities affected by emergencies to achieve a proper and effective level of functioning. I think we should all be looking over the disaster recovery toolkit for local government that was developed by the emergency services in Victoria following those dreadful fires a decade ago. It's comprehensive and has really a line-by-line way that local government can pitch in its support. Now, as far as monetary contributions go, there's a fair bit of money that's already in the process. There's the $2 billion from the federal government, $70 million from Twiggy Forrest, a lot of other services and particularly individuals. So there's a lot of monetary support that's going in at the moment, and council can and perhaps that is the best way forward. But wouldn't it be nice to go through the comfort of knowing not only have we taken our own readings and learnings and discussed them, but I feel whilst that opportunity hasn't been afforded, neither has the chance to actually consult our staff. Now, the Princess Highway is a disaster zone as far as all these being closed because there's all these trees that are in a precarious position that may need to come down. Actually, what might be the best level of support through a council like ours perhaps would be talking to our parks team, people that are actually involved in dealing post bushfires, because maybe an in-kind support will be more useful than a monetary support. Perhaps it's a situation where some of our staff may wish to be, may wish to go there, and I'd be very happy for us to be keeping them on the payroll if they were helping out our colleagues interstate. That might also provide an opportunity to learn about recovery responses as they're happening live and to bring these learnings back to us. So there's nothing that's particularly in itself wrong with what the motion is doing, other than it's an opportunity cost, an opportunity to do the very best response we can do to our fellow councils and Australians interstate that are in a really precarious position. So while supporting the intent, I just don't think we're going to be delivering our optimum response as a council because we haven't deliberated as a group of aldermen, and we again haven't asked our best resources that we have, which again is some of our staff and officers as to how they think the best input could be. So yes, it's not that I'm against the motion, it's just that I think there's a better approach.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to also commend Alderman von Berto on this motion. I think it's very timely. I think it recognises the urgency of the level of support. I had the honour to serve on the Bushfire Recovery Task Force last year after our own fires, and recognise the need immediately after a fire, when people have lost their homes, lost everything, to provide financial assistance at that point. So I think that that's the role of the Red Cross. I think there are things that need to be done right now. I'm just overwhelmed by the number of people who've lost their homes. But I'd also like to concentrate on the mitigation aspect of this. We know that there are going to be more fires like this. We know that the bushfire season is getting longer and more intense. We know that we need to take every action we can to guard against fires in our own region, particularly coming down the Southern Midlands, which is tinder dry, and the Mayor of Sorell has told me is just a disaster waiting to happen. And if that happens like the Dunalley fire, no amount of hazard reduction burns will stop that fire burning. So I think we need to, as a council, really look at what our options are and really start investing in those mitigation strategies. And if anyone thinks that hazard reduction is the only way, then I have some articles here that I can provide, which are quoting former chief of fire officers and current ones as to why that is not the solution. It's part of the solution, but it's only a very small part of the solution, because we're facing catastrophic fires and unprecedented levels of intensity. I think a workshop is a good idea, but not for the reasons that Alderman Walker has suggested. We're very lucky to have the UTAS Fire Centre Director David Bowman on our doorstep, and I would really like to propose that we have a workshop as part of our moving towards mitigation to have him in and advise us, because we as aldermen cannot decide on the best way to tackle this. We need to talk to the experts, or have the experts talk to us and advise us. But I do support Alderman von Berto's motion.
I too commend the intent of the motion, but I have some grave reservations about local government dabbling in the areas described as Area 1. For starters, it's a specialist area that is constantly evolving. Just about every season, the response to fire or mitigation, preparation and recovery changes as a result of learned experiences. The Fire Authority Council of Australia is the leading organisation in the nation where these decisions and these matters and these approaches are made at that national level. Now, that flows on into our own state emergency management arrangements. We have a state emergency management committee, which is an all-hazard committee, which includes fire as well as many other hazards. At the local level, we have and local government is actually represented on that state emergency management committee. When it comes, and of course Clarence has its own emergency management committee, Mr. Mayor, which you chair. So these arrangements are already in place, and they are reviewed constantly in the light of experience. And I think that if we start at this level, dabbling in those sorts of tripartite government arrangements that are under constant review, are the subject of frequent commissions of inquiry, and I think we will start to get, we muddy the waters. So I'm really concerned that, as far as the state and federal government have disaster committee arrangements which are immediately kicked into place, and that involves cash to people who have lost assets and homes. It also covers lots of other things about the reconstruction phase and those sorts of things. Our role really is in the management of the evacuation centres and places such as that, should they be required. And I think those arrangements are best managed under the auspices of the State Emergency Management Committee. So although I have the sentiment with one, I feel that we are trespassing into areas of expertise where there are existing bodies, and it's constantly evolving. And when Alderman Warren's right, you know, listening to the fire chief in New South Wales explaining that, you know, that this idea that we could hazard fuel reductions, and he points out that only had they removed all the hazards 1 year ago, would they have prevented the scale of the He points out that the areas that were burnt and where the fuel was reduced 2 years ago, just you wouldn't know it happened. So, you know, given the smoke hazards, given the health hazards, and given the inefficiency of fuel reduction, a much more strategic approach would be needed. And I don't think that that supporting this motion would help that too much. As for part 2, I am sort of in general support of it, except we don't need to be making decisions like these on the fly. We really ought to be sitting back at the budget table saying, are we in a position to do this? As for 3, I wholly support it, which is what we would have done in any event through the state emergency management arrangement. So the thing is that I can't support all 3 components of it, and therefore I can't support the motion.
James. Thank you, Mr Mayor. At our Friday's briefing, I indicated that I was supportive of part 1 and part 3 because I believe it's appropriate that the Local Government Association of Tasmania is the driving force which would coordinate and bring together all councils and therefore be able to make some submission or even, for that matter, some monetary contribution towards the cause. So part 1 is really, I think it hits the nail on the head, and it's advocating on LGAT's part for coordinated policies and actions from 3 levels of government as the bushfire reparation, adaptation and mitigation. With respect to part 2, again I have some concerns about, well, notwithstanding the Hobart City Council has made its contribution, or as I think the word is, likely to donate 25,000 towards the cause, then again it's that council which has its probably own policies and modus operandi for doing such that in that particular case, and therefore there doesn't appear to be any other council that I'm aware of, and I stand corrected on that, in southern Tasmania other than what has the Hobart City Council is likely to donate, for them to be able to come forward and make a donation in respect of this particular cause. Having said that, again I refer and I can only emphasise the fact that the Local Government Association of Tasmania is that body. That's the body that really coordinates and advocates on behalf of all councils. And I would have liked to have thought that that matter could have been handled either in an impromptu or promptu meeting between the councils or among the councils in order to look at some means by which the Local Government Association of Tasmania can make some leadership proposal and role by coordinating the councils in making a concerted response, and also to as far as a monetary contribution is concerned. I just think that at the moment, just plucking 20,000 out of the air, and again it is not budgeted for, and it's my understanding this has to be an absolute majority because it's not actually part of our process, and it will, even though a book entry we can call it a deficit because it hasn't been budgeted for in this particular financial year. In the overall scheme of things, that book entry can be done and adjusted through some creative accounting to sort of overcome that deficit. But notwithstanding that, I think we need to sit down as much as with the Local Government Association of Tasmania and Southern Councils to try to resolve this and be seen as a group going forward. And in that instance, I am in favour, as I mentioned, of part 1 and part 3, but because it's in the mix, part 1, 2 and 3, unfortunately I cannot support the motion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, look, I'm going to support the motion, even though part 2 I did have some reservations about it. But look, this is damn serious. We can't be picking and choosing here. I agree with Alderman Walker. I think the points he made are very good. Alderman Warren, very good. Why can't we start using them all? Just because there's this motion on the table, I don't want to see fires here, but I'll tell you what, going round and seeing the undergrowth in some areas, even in Clarence, it does worry me a little. Now, Alderman Mulder told us about other states, but whatever they were doing, obviously, it just didn't work. And that's why we've got to get smarter, and we've got to come up with ideas that would not let this happen in Tasmania again. I mean, I was, believe it or not, I was alive in the 67 and I went through the bushfires. One of the scariest things I'd ever seen is a house just explode. I've never seen that before, a house just exploded like that. And I'll never ever forget that. So I think this motion is a start, but let's take the other options that Aldermen have raised tonight and let's keep moving forward so it'll never happen in Clarence.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've thought long and hard about this motion since our briefing on Friday, and I've really appreciated the debate tonight, actually, and like Alderman Pearce, I do remember 67 very clearly, and one comment that Alderman von Berthold made earlier that stands out in my mind is what goes around comes around, and I would hate for anyone in our city to be in this situation without someone on the other side saying, look, we're here to help you out. So I will be supporting this motion. However, the debate has been useful, and I certainly back up what Alderman Pearce was saying. It would have been handy to have been able to workshop this at some stage, and even though I'm not a fan of rapid response, I think we do have to do something now, and we can be a leader. If Hobart's put their hand up, no one else has as yet, well, why can't we be the second? I will be supporting the motion.
Just very briefly, I'm of a very similar mind to Alderman, well, most Aldermen actually at the table, in terms of the fact that there is so much that we are agreeing on. I think in point 1, it's about not being siloed out of the discussion, is how I view the intent of it. Can I, though, ask a question about this dollar figure that's been arrived at? Hobart aside, why 20?
Look, I'll leave the Alderman von Berthold to answer that in the right reply.
Okay, no worries. Can I ask a procedural question in terms of how that money is then taken out of the budget?
Certainly. General Manager.
Thank you for the question. The money will be allocated from the General Reserve, but will be, because it's not part of the estimate, the approved estimates for this financial year will effectively run as a deficit amount, just simply because it's unbudgeted.
So do we have another vote on that at a future meeting, or is this vote enough for that?
This is enough.
Okay.
Provided it's an absolute majority.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Newington.
Look, I suppose, I congratulate Alderman von Berthold on bringing the motion forward, and I think, as Alderman Kennedy said, there's some really good perspectives being put forward here. We all, want to help out when we get that chance. I mean, the issue at the top there in point 1 that I'm really concerned about from my perspective is some of the duplication that I've talked about in the past between state, federal and local governments, and I'd really prefer to see us get our handle on exactly what we currently do as a council and what the policies actually are and what we have control over. I mean, that's the thing that's more important to me. What can we do as individuals to change policies or modify policies to make changes to make this easier for people to protect their own properties and to know exactly what they can and can't do. I mean, I mentioned in the last meeting a question I noticed about an ad that we had where it said clear your own your property, but then it said check with us first, and I've got concerns about those sort of things where there's a bit of there could be some difficulty in people doing what they want to do, and I know from discussions with Alderman von Berthold before about the coastal erosion and protecting coastal properties, and I don't know enough about what we actually have in place before we can make decisions based on what we can do as individuals for our own community. Whether this point one helps us do that or not, I'm not sure, but I think I welcome the chance to sit down and have that workshop in the short term to find out from all the experts, including the ones that Alderman Warren's mentioned, so we get all perspectives on what is possible and what is practical and what is going to help. And obviously we all know that there's differences of opinion in that space. But I mean, everything's got to be laid on the table in every possible consideration. The $20,000, look, I think that's the least we could do as a council. I'd probably prefer to have a chance to sit down and think about that, because it's not going to be making any difference to anyone on the ground now. We've got another month, or if we had a chance to look at what we could do over and above that, I'd even consider giving a little bit more if that was possible. And I suppose, certainly number three, I mean, we'd all do that where we can. And I mean, like all the other aldermen, I'm sort of 50-50 on this one, to be honest, and it's a tricky one, but I think the nature of the catastrophe in terms of the people that are affected, and normally I don't support duplication of governments and things like that, but I think in this case, I think we've got to send a message that we were there to support other people. And is it the right way? Well, who knows? But I think on this instance, I think it's worth us just saying, well, even if it's only 20,000 and writing a few letters, I think we've just got to stand up and say, hey, we're with you and we're there to help and support other communities around Australia.
Thank you.
Just very briefly, I guess, just before Christmas, I attended an emergency volunteer training session, which was run by a number of people who'd been in the Victorian bushfires, and about the kind of things that you need to do as a volunteer and all of the things that come up. But one of the things that they talked about quite a lot was the different funding requirements and what's necessary in those kind of situations. And I guess for me, one of the things that this deals with is that immediate, on the ground. We need to be able to buy clothes for people, we need to be able to buy supplies of all sorts of things that you just can't get if you're waiting for the federal government to hand out Centrelink payments and all those kind of things. Yes, as Alderman Walker mentioned, you do need those long-term responses too. Absolutely you do. And local government and organisations like Blaze Aid and all of those things get heavily involved in that kind of stuff. But I think for us, and for everybody in Clarence, we need to show that we understand what's happening and we really care about what's happening. 20,000 isn't going to go an awful long way, but it's something and it helps. And as Alderman Kennedy said, I think we would all like to think that if it happened here, people would support Clarence residents in the same kind of way. I'm certainly supporting the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll go through the right of reply in relation to the various parts rather than responding to the various aldermen. As you can see in part one, it's actually that Council urges Legat to advocate for coordinated policies and actions from the three levels of government. And in my explanatory notes, I make it clear that it is about coordination and collaboration. And whilst there has been some collaboration and some coordination, there is a lot of work to be done in that area. And one of those methods which may be used is COAG, which is an existing body and, as I explain here, is made up of the three levels of government. I think it's incredibly important that local government is involved in the bigger picture policies and actions, because most of the work is done at a local level with limited funds. So I think it's incredibly important that we are at the table in relation to that. In relation to the donation, I've already explained how that figure came about. In essence, it's a figure plucked out of the air. I think it's pretty important to note that many of the aldermen have said this is a start, this is a rapid response, this is urgent. That's what this is about. It is about us showing that we have compassion and care for others. And so this is a relatively small amount in the circumstances and in relation to our overall budget. I think it's very important to note that it's not an either or. This is about a start. It is about saying we are leaders, we want to make a difference and that we care. The other aspects that have been covered by Alderman Walker, Alderman Mulder, Alderman James, in relation to ongoing responses, I think that's incredibly important, that we have one or more workshops, that we look at how else we can help. I think it's important that we actually join with others, from individuals right through. As I say, we have individuals donating, we have the various levels of government donating funds, we have overseas countries, small overseas countries donating.
Thank you, Alderman von Berto. So the motion before the chair is as tabled by Alderman von Berto. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried. I might point out that we are planning a workshop on bushfire management and what we're doing in Clarence, what our responsibilities are. What date did we have in mind for that?
We haven't settled on a date yet, Mayor, but we plan to do that as soon as possible and likely towards the end of February.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just to maybe put a bit more detail on that, we'd like that workshop to be an activity that contributes to the budget process.
Okay. Moving on to item 10, reports from outside bodies. 10.1, reports from single and joint authorities. Firstly, the Copping Refuse Disposal Site Joint Authority. I note the September quarterly report is pending. Anything to add to that, Alderman Walker?
It will be a written on the agenda.
Thank you. Tasmanian Water Corporation, I have nothing to report there. Under the Greater Hobart Committee, I'd invite a motion noting the meeting summary for the initiation workshop included in the agenda, please. If I could have a mover and a second. Thank you, Alderman Chong. A seconder. Thank you, Alderman Warren. Are there any questions in regard to that agenda item? Put the motion that we note it. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 10.2, report from Council and special committees and other representative bodies. Are there any reports? Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I table the minutes from the Richmond Advisory Committee, the Cultural History Advisory Committee, the Health and Wellbeing Advisory Committee, and also just let them know if I've put a program for the Jazz Festival for everybody and some in the gallery too.
Thank you. Any other reports?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'd like to table the minutes of the Clarence Positive Ageing Advisory Committee for the 17th of October 2019.
No other reports? Moving on to reports of officers. 11.1, that the information in the weekly briefing reports of the 2nd, 9th and 16th of December and the 6th of January. Noted. Thank you, Alderman Bond. Second
Oh, second.
Alderman Pearce, I think, was off the mark there.
Did he stand up?
He did. He actually did. Yes. Are there any other comments in regard to the weekly reports? Alderman James.
Yes, the weekly briefing report of the 6th of January 2020. And I refer to Cambridge Oval lease of public land. And in that notification that's signed by Mr Nelson, I understand that it is incomplete in a couple of aspects of that. And my question through you to Mr Nelson is it so, Mr Nelson, that Mr Rowlands was successful in his application and appeal to RIMPAT under section 178 of the Act to have Council's decision of the 14th of January 2019 deemed invalid. And also the decision that he in turn made application to have the meeting of the 9th of September deemed invalid. In those two cases, would the General Manager kindly provide the Council with the results of the first appeal against Council's decision on the 14th, regarding Council's decision on the 14th of January, and then the subsequent appeal that Mr Mitch Rowlands made with respect to the decision in September 2019.
Thank you for the question, Alderman James. In respect to what I'll refer to as the January decision, it's important that Aldermen understand the nuance of the Tribunal's decision. The Tribunal deemed the decision of Council to be invalid because of the oversight in respect to Mr Rowlands' representation. They didn't deem the decision to be invalid because of Mr Rowlands' appeal. So essentially their reasoning was that Mr Rowlands' appeal couldn't progress because there wasn't a valid decision on which it could be assessed. And in respect to the September decision, Mr Rowlands withdrew his appeal, and therefore Council's decision is now deemed to be valid and can be progressed. I hope that clarifies.
Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. The weekly briefing report of the 6th of January, page 3 and Begonia Street, Mayor. I really find this information really useful and I really look forward to the workshop.
A question or?
No, just a statement.
Yes. Thank you very much, Alderman Pearce. Are there any other comments in regard to the weekly briefing report? In that case, I'll put the motion that the four reports be noted, or the information in them be noted. All those in favour? Carried unanimously, I believe. There are no matters to be dealt with under 11.2, so I'd like to advise that Council intends to sit as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And the first item there is 11.3.1, which is an amendment application. General Manager.
Through you, Mayor, we've had an application to withdraw that item and the appropriate fees have been paid. So it's now a decision of Council as to whether it accepts that.
I'd like to invite a procedural motion. Thank you, Alderman Pearce. Second, Alderman Walker. It being procedural, there is no debate. I'll put the motion that that the matter be deferred. All those in favour? Against? Carried. 11.3.2 is a development application at 158 Bicheno Street, Clifton Beach. Change of use to visitor accommodation and a new outbuilding. Alderman Newington, thank you. I think Alderman Blomley was next off the rank. Would you like to speak to it?
Well, just from... Yeah, I mean, it seems like a fairly big block with a use that's not going to impinge on the local residents too much. The officers have put the time and work into checking it all. If they say it seems okay, and I think it's a suitable development for someone who's got enough land to be able to share it with some people who want to come down and spend time in our wonderful beach area, and I think it's something that we should be supporting.
Alderman Blomley. Other speakers? In that case, there's no need for a right of reply, so I'll put the motion that's recommending approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.3.3 is a development application at 12 Ackler Place, 7 Mile Beach for a 15-lot subdivision. Alderman Muller, thank you. Second, Alderman Kennedy. Would you like to speak to it?
This one, the usual issues of my pets about water inundation and those sorts, and wastewater treatment. I'm quite happy that to have been advised that this area is actually on the high ground, and when there was inundation in 7 Mile Beach, this is where the people retreated to. So I don't think the inundation will be quite the issue that it was for other areas there. So I encourage support.
Just very briefly, I think in the officer's report the conclusion sums this up very well. A well-considered approach to neighbourhood design. And I think the reduction in traffic will also be welcome to many residents at 7 Mile Beach. And I think it's very well suited to the area. Thank you.
Walker and then Alderman Newington.
Yes, look, just as a matter of clarification, we had a subdivision proposal come here a meeting or two ago in relation to the golf course land. There was a rather novel condition, I think, put on there around effectively wanting to halt further development until a master plan had been done for the area. I just wonder if the head of city planning might be able to elaborate on the impact of that condition at that meeting.
I'll invite the General Manager to open the discussion.
Thank you, Mayor. In respect to that condition, the condition is not able to be enforced, if that makes sense. The reason being that we can't condition one development application to act as a fetter on others. We've still got obligations under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act, and Council must consider each application as a planning authority. That's not to say that the intent of that provision to proceed with the structure plan can't be implemented. It just can't be used as a fetter against further DAs.
Sounds like it probably shouldn't have been attached to that application either. I have no problems with the application before us. As I said, have some problems with that previous way the council dealt with the other one. I'll be supporting this one.
Well, you beat me to it, Alderman Walker. That was exactly my point I was going to make about how I had concerns when we passed that motion at the last meeting, and I was very concerned that we were going to use it to stifle the opportunity for people to get out there and spend their money and invest in the local community and create housing, which is the one thing we keep hearing about that there's a shortage of, and housing affordability and having more opportunity for creating housing for the community. I think is a good thing, and I've certainly looked through the plans here, and I'm certainly in support of this one in particular, and I urge everyone else to do the same.
Thank you. Other speakers? Yes, question through you to Mr. Lovell. On page 54, Mr. Lovell, under the Inundation Prone Areas Code, and on page 54, it says in paragraph C, the proposal does not meet C, as the entire development site is covered by the code. Could you just please explain those circumstances as why it does not meet C as part of the Inundation-Prone Areas Code, please?
It's simply, through Mr. Mayor, it's simply because the entire site is covered by the code. But the following performance criteria overcomes that in terms of the ability of the site to contain protect its disposal system from the effects of overland stormwater flow on occasions.
Any other speakers?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not convinced in relation to the inundation aspects of this particular development. Having been around, having lived at 7 Mile Beach, having been around on council for 12 years, having seen the issues that have occurred there, I actually think that we need to be looking at this area holistically. And yes, I'm the one who actually suggested putting in that provision in the last application that we had, and Alderman James accepted that provision. Yes, I agree, perhaps the wording could have actually been a little bit more detailed, but I do have major concerns in relation to inundation in 7 Mile Beach, and I have to say that I am not convinced. So from that perspective, I won't be supporting this application.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Isn't it fantastic we have experts to advise us on these matters? It's fantastic we have experts to advise us, particularly regarding issues of inundation, Mr Mayor. This is an infill development that will increase housing stock in a sympathetic and impressive way. This is the type of developer that we ought to be championing in this city. What better use of this land? What fantastic use of this land, Mr Mayor. Summed up very well by our officers, Mr Mayor, at page 59, where the officers write, the proposal represents a well-considered approach to neighbourhood design, particularly having regard to the connection of Woodhurst Road and Aqua Place, together with the appropriate walkway linkages. The proposal is therefore recommended for approval. I'm very happy to support this motion, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Knoll. So the motion before the Chair is for approval, subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried, and that concludes our business as a planning authority. Moving on to asset management. 11.5.1 is Rosny Hill Road multiple user pathway funding with amendments to the roads capital budget. Sorry, mover and seconder, please. Alderman Newington, thank you. And Alderman Blomley. Alderman Newington, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, obviously, you know, the need to create, safe and easy to ride commuting cycle paths is an important part of our role as a council, and this one will certainly help to achieve that objective. We've got a lot of, obviously the commuting route through that space from Eastlands, through Clarence and Howrah and those sort of areas will be a great addition and make it a little bit easier to get up and down Rosny Hill. We'd all like to hope it didn't cost more than what it does, but I think under the circumstances to get it right this time and make sure that it does its job, I'd certainly ask my colleagues to support this and keep the move forward in terms of creating these sort of projects that are going to make it easy for us to make cycling a bigger part of how people get around and certainly take the pressure off the roads and hopefully get everyone healthy and fit. So I think it's it'll be a great thing to see it all happen.
Thank you, Ron.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Yes, look, I want to go on the video record in relation to this, that whilst I'm supporting it, when I initially read it, I was viscerally opposed to it on the grounds that the intersection of the end of that path of, near the Howrah Road, Caltex to beach access is well and truly substandard. It's no joy at all when you've got young kids and they're early on their bike stage to come to the end of that point. So on that initial basis, I was going to dig my heels in, but reading further on and discussions with the head of engineering, the explanations around how more work needs to be done in that area and how the reallocation of these funds can be used in a more immediate fashion means that in no way should we think that the Howrah Road to Caltex, that access there isn't important. It remains just as important after this motion as it was before this motion. This is just a simple fact of timelines and what we're able to do at certain points. But it is a high priority issue, that other one, and we'll make sure it's refunded in the next budget circumstance.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Having been the past chair of the Bicycle Committee, both of these projects have actually been around for a long time and been of concern. And so I actually support Alderman Walker, who was the Deputy Chair in a past iteration of the Bike Committee, in saying that we must not lose sight of the Howrah Road Caltex to beach access. It's incredibly important, and it has been an issue for some time that the Bicycle Committee has been working on and looking at. Thank you.
Look, I take on board the concerns raised by Alderman Von Berto and Alderman Walker. I can guarantee that it's certainly an issue that I want to see tidied up as well. You know, I mean, and the proposed plan to stick a path in front of the only my concern was to put a plan, the path from the end of the coastal trail in front of the service station, the shop, and then stop at Bingley Street didn't really solve that intersection to the level that it needed to. And I think as part of a master plan of that whole space in terms of the cycling access to the up the hill towards the lights and how the coastal trail links from where it is now to that other place we've talked a little bit lately called Cleeve Court, and bike commuting through Tranmere Road and all those sort of things. I think we've got a bigger picture to deal with, but yeah, certainly the safety issues and dealing with the end of the coastal trail there, you know, is certainly a priority for me as the current chair of the bike committee, and I certainly won't leave that one hanging in the next budget round. So I encourage everyone to support this and move on to the next one in the next budget.
Thank you. So the motion before the chair is that we reallocate $106,000 within the 2019-2020 roads capital budget. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. 11.5.2 is the Hobart Airport to Midway Point Causeway revised concept. That we note the revised plans. Thanks, Alderman Bromley. Seconded, Alderman Newington. Thank you. Wish to speak to it?
Case of noting, do you wish to explain, Mr.
No.
Yeah, I'm just concerned. I think I've raised this issue before at workshops and other forum. Here we are on the middle of one of the busiest highways, about to put a roundabout in to service a road coming from 5 Mile Beach, or along 5 Mile Beach, and the golf club and the Barilla Bay. And this is just a few hundred metres down from where we're taking out a roundabout in order to put an interchange at the Hobart Airport. It's a well-known fact that roundabouts work quite well when there are converging traffic of around equal densities so that they can merge and move on. Here we are with entire morning traffic has to give, the Sorrel traffic has to give way to anyone coming up 7 Mile Beach Road. So I think the solution to this area ought to be either a structured intersection without a roundabout or a slip lane from Barilla Bay. So I really am concerned that we go and plonk these roundabouts in and then later on we discover that they've been counterproductive to our attempts to move traffic. And if you're thinking about a thing, just have a look at the Mornington roundabout.
Boulder, just noting the final part of this, that we authorise the GM to provide a revised submission which actually suggests traffic signals. Is that consistent with your thinking?
It is, except I'm more concerned that the traffic signals is probably another way to go too, because I mean, traffic lights on highways aren't quite the way to go. So that's why I'm saying that a slip road or even an underpass arrangement with some acceleration and deceleration lanes to allow traffic to cross the highway, or as is now happening on the Midlands Highway, where there's a need to turn around. You've got, for the trucks, there's a layover, you go and do a hook like that, and then you wait for the traffic to clear in both directions before you move over. So there are lots of treatments that we could use other than the roundabout. So, you know, I mean, I'm happy for the advice to be traffic lights or other particular motions, but I mean, they're not limited to that. But this roundabout stuff really is a...
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am pleased, and it's been noted on page 73, that the proposed intersection has been designed to mitigate impact on the adjacent land, that's upon the Commonwealth land, which I think has overcome one of the matters in there. But my question through you to Mr. Graham, his capacity as Group Manager. Mr. Graham, has the Department of State Growth's policy changed with respect to traffic lights? Traffic lights being installed in close proximity to an intersection or a major intersection, an overcarriageway, as in this particular case. In the back of my mind, and I'm going back perhaps in time a little bit here, but there was always some concern from DMR, State Growth and the other government agencies that represented the road network in Tassie, that they were very reluctant to have traffic lights installed within close proximity to a intersection, a major intersection in this particular case. Has there been a change in their thinking patterns, or is this something that I didn't actually read correctly or was understood?
Through Mr Mayor, I'm not too sure if there's actually been necessarily a change in policy but I think they're looking at individual cases on a case-by-case situation, and this one taking into account the issues of adjacent property owners is why they've gone in towards traffic lights rather than looking at other possible ways of the intersection working.
Yes. Because this is in a very major section of our road and the road to Sorell, I'm just trying to look, what is the work span for this, and do we know if the operations will be going on 24 hours a day, or what's going to happen? Because this is a very important section of the road, and it's just going to take, it seems like it's going to take forever. It's not just an 8-hour day, but just an 8-hour day that'll be still going for years.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Alderman Pearce, the project at this point in time is at the concept design stage. There aren't any detailed designs or proposals for works at this point in time. That's certainly a way off at this stage.
All right, other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Blomley. So I'll put the motion... Sorry, please go ahead. I missed that, Alderman Walker.
Look, this response is fine. I'm comfortable with it. I support it. It is indeed a big improvement on our initial response, which was basically we don't support any encroachment on the golf course, even if the proponents of the golf course wish for us to do so, or the road to do so.
So the motion before the Chair is that we note the revised plans and authorise the General Manager to make a revised submission. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. 11.5.3 is Wellington Street, Richmond, roadworks upgrade, and it involves another reallocation within the roads and stormwater capital budgets. Thank you, Alderman Chong. Second, Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Over the last 6 to 9 months, the traffic in Wellington Street has increased dramatically. A lot of that anecdotally seems to be the pileup that is inevitably Midway Point and the airport roundabout, and people are finding that it's actually quicker to go out of their way and come through Richmond to get to Rosny or to get to Hobart than to actually go on the highway. This has caused a number of problems in Wellington Street, both in terms of the people who live there actually getting out of their driveways, which is an issue, but also there's a school there where a lot of people in the village walk to the school, walk their children to the school, which is something we all like to encourage. And they're very concerned about the safety of their children on Wellington Street with this increased level of traffic. The work that's been done here has been in consideration for some time and involves putting pedestrian rampages and those kinds of things along Wellington Street to slow traffic down and to give the capacity for people to walk across the road in a much safer fashion. It's been through the community, both through the RAC and the wider community on a number of occasions, and is widely supported by the community, and I seek council support.
Any other speakers? Alderman Mulder, and then Alderman James, and did I miss somebody else? And Alderman Pearce, thank you.
Well, I commend the plan and the works. I have some concerns, and for those who attended that community meeting, so the questions is which parts of Brinkman's Road and Grass Tree Hill Road are council responsibilities, or are they all state government, state growth responsibilities?
Able to answer that?
Sorry, no. Just may have to get back to you, just checking our GIS to find out exactly which parts become our responsibility. I think Brentop comes at a certain point into Sorrells. We are to a certain
At the top of the hill, it becomes Sorel.
We're responsible up to that point.
To that point.
Yes.
This is what causes me, I think, some concern, is that this is a very nice traffic street and all the rest of it, but does diddly squat for the issues that have been raised about the increasing traffic and the safety there. Yes, it's good, but it's still only 2 lanes and it's becoming a highway. It's becoming the alternative route through from Sorel to the Bowen Bridge. So I've got some concerns that the way you're really going to solve the traffic issues inside Richmond is to create that the eastern bypass, which is also do something about the development, access to the development that we got the petition from this evening. So although I'm supportive of this, I think we really do need to step back with some of these roads and streets and have a look at that broader network. And if they're state government roads, like the Richmond Road is, then that's great. But if people are using them as major arterial roads, then I think the state government needs to step in and say, the management of traffic is a global issue, and we need to deal with this with both Brinktop Road and Grasstree Hill Road, because they are rapidly becoming, and they are unsuited to the volumes of traffic, as is the village of Richmond and the bridge itself.
Yeah, look, some of those comments that Alderman Mulder made are quite pertinent, and I just really would like Mr. Graham to advise myself and the council, for that matter, as to whether or not these works in Wellington and St John's Circle will have any impact on the proposal that council will be considering with respect to the Crease development, which will be coming to council in February this year. In particular, the increase in traffic in Wellington Street, for the reasons that's already been mentioned, and also to access through St John's Circle off Wellington, and also the impact that will have on the access to the development that Crease is proposing in their 44-lot subdivision in Richmond. So could he just explain to me as to whether or not there will be an impact on traffic movements through Richmond, in particular Wellington Street, and will that have any impact upon whether or not the road network is capable of carrying additional cars into the 44-lot subdivision via Wellington and also St John's Circle?
I think if I could just, before handing over to Mr Graham, point out that it would be wrong to prejudge the Crease application, that no decision has been made about that. We'll have to deal with that once we receive the assessment and the report, which will involve traffic issues. Yes. But we haven't got to that point yet.
No, but perhaps...
Mr Graham.
I cannot... Well, the purpose of this, which started some years ago, was to help address pedestrian safety crossing a section of road which has become busier in recent years. Certainly to address those going to and from the school during peak periods. The subdivision has, as you know, come out sort of well beyond the design of this, and I can't comment on the subdivision process at all. But this road section here, as shown in the drawing, has been designed to allow for future increases in the road network. It's been designed also to slow down vehicles through there in a 50k zone. Thank you.
Alderman Pearce.
Mayor, as Mr Graham just said, this has been on the agenda for a long time, and the last RAC meeting as Deputy Chair, along with the Deputy Mayor, people did agree with this. Now, one of the questions I did ask before with the airport road, is it just going to be an 8-hour work shift? Because this is what's forcing these extra cars coming this way to Richmond, and that's, I think that's part of the problem. If this new development at the airport around those streets here are just going to force more and more traffic into Richmond. That's why I really fear it's just going to be an 8-hour job. We're going to see a lot more traffic on this road. This road needed anyway, as Mr Graham said, for the safety aspect alone. Now I reckon this is fantastic. It's actually got to the stage now, and I'd say let's get on with it.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right, reply, Alderman Chong.
Just very briefly, I guess, to take up the comment about traffic management more generally. I think we all hope that the work that's being done on the causeway and the airport roundabout and Midway Point will, in the fullness of time, lead to better traffic flow in that direction and remove some of this issue. But this is an issue today. It's a safety issue today in an area that we're responsible for, and I think it's really important that we get on and do the best we can now.
Thank you. So the motion before the Chair is as recommended, which essentially involves allocating funds from both the major road dig-out program and the Wellington Street road upgrade. In other words, the roads and stormwater capital budgets. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to governance, and before introducing this item, I'd like to call on the General Manager to give us a short briefing on our responsibilities under the Act.
Thank you, Mayor. The Act has some fairly straightforward requirements in terms of the way that Code of Conduct complaints are addressed. There's significant confidentiality obligations on all participants during the process. However, once a determination has been made, if a valid complaint has been found, then that determination is required by the Local Government Act, requires me to list that on the first council meeting agenda, and that the council notes the report at that time. So this process is about, when it boils down to it, putting the determination report on the public record for the purpose of it being transparent.
Thank you. Move the recommendation, Alderman Blomley.
I move the recommendation.
Do you have a seconder, please? Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Do you wish to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Do you second wish to speak? Other speakers?
Hi, thank you, Chairman. Look, it's unfortunate this matter has got to this stage, and I think that between the parties it's all there in black and white, and at the end of the day it has now become public knowledge and it's become public material, which is, as I said, does tend to raise a question or two in the community about how we manage and run things. I thought that this matter, even though I was unaware of it happening, until we have it public released, and it was in the Mercury newspaper a day or two ago, that this matter could have been resolved, I think, before it got to the stage.
That's hypothetical, Alderman James.
And that may have been the role of the Mayor to try to conciliate and...
Alderman James, before we go any further, it's important for us to note the process that it's been through and what the findings are. To go down hypothetical pathways is not appropriate at this juncture.
Well, the motion is before the Chair.
Yes.
And it's open to debate. And
I just ask that you stay on the topic.
Yeah, and I'm just speaking, saying notes and receives the report.
Exactly.
And the report is in front of us. Exactly. And all I'm saying to you is that it's not a good look in the community, and that I think is something that needs to be said. Otherwise, there's only one other point I would like to make, and that's in relation to the panel took into account that Mr Harrison Graffinakis is a 16-year-old man, and therefore he is a minor in this particular matter, it would seem to me, and therefore that matter has been considered by the panel. So in conclusion, I'm still of the view that this matter could have been resolved before it got to this stage, but nevertheless it didn't, and now we have it before us, and I'll support the motion.
Other speakers? Right to reply, Alderman Blum?
No, thank you, Mr.
So I'll put the motion that Council receives and notes the report. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 12, Alderman's question time. There's no matters on notice up until 12.123. 12.4, there's answers to questions without notice from a previous council meeting. General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I just propose that those questions and answers be taken as read.
If there's no concerns with that, Alderman.
Just referring to the typo that we talked about on Friday, as long as that's...
Thank you. Moving on to 12.5, questions without notice. I'll start with Alderman Lyon.
Yes, I've just got a very brief one, which I suspect you'll have to take notice on. The Eastern Richmond bypass has been mooted for a long, long time. In light of the previous answers regarding Richmond Road and Brinkman, I'm just wondering whether this Eastern Richmond bypass will be a state government responsibility like the one the Western Link Road was, or is this something that Council's going to have to grapple with in due course?
Thank you. We will take that on notice.
Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. First one is, has Council investigated and or identified locations for potential park and ride sites within the city, and if so, where?
Thank you for the question, Alderman Blomley. At this point in time, Council has not undertaken any particular investigations of park and ride locations. However, it's important to note that the City Deal implementation plan includes a reference to the Tasman Highway Corridor Study, including consideration of supporting infrastructure, which could include park and ride facilities. So one would expect that through the course of that piece of work on the corridor study, that some further clarification will arise in respect to park and ride.
Thank the General Manager for that response, Mr. Mayor. My second question is Council able to provide an update on the Belrive Marina expansion and seawall?
Thank you again. The seawall or wave attenuator we expect to go out to tender in February with the aim of commencing construction around April or May this year. That, of course, will come back to Council once the tenders close for Council approval. In terms of the Belrive Yacht Club Marina development, as we understand things, that development is progressing, and that while specific dates haven't been set, the expectation is that they will commence their development within the first half of 2020.
I have two questions, Mr. Mayor, and this first one may have been answered, but I'm not quite certain. Can the Alderman be apprised as soon as possible of Council's current bushfire management strategy and how it's being applied in the current bushfire season, preferably via an Alderman's workshop item?
Thank you, Alderman Valberto. The short answer would be yes. Slightly more detailed answer is Council obviously has its own bushfire management strategy and has done for well in excess of 20 years, and the main focal point of that strategy is throughout the city manually reducing fuel load on council land that's adjacent to property, including areas where queries from the public warrant action, plus ensuring fire trails are clear and so forth. So a combination of fuel reduction and maintaining access into those areas. We also conduct a series of backburning operations, usually through the autumn period when it's appropriate and safe to do so. But again, that's dictated by weather and can vary from year to year. As we mentioned earlier on, we will program a workshop to talk about bushfire management strategy towards the end of February, and we'll provide updates with a specific date and further details as we move through that program.
And my second question is, how does Council go about progressing its resolution, which was part of the development application SD 2019-10-20 Regal Court 7 Mile Beach 49 lot subdivision decision, that due to various current and projected geotechnical, flora, fauna, traffic, social and sporting and recreational facilities and stormwater drainage and inundation issues, a long-term structure plan for 7 Mile Beach Township should be developed to guide the delivery of a quality urban environment?
Thank you for the question. A detailed structure plan will need to be comprehensively worked up in respect to that, so that's a reasonably sized project. As mentioned earlier, we have taken the intent of the decision in terms of that element of the Regal Court DA, and we plan to bring that to Council as part of the budget process in order to gain the appropriate amount of funds to be able to progress a structure plan for 7 Mile Beach. And ultimately, if Council agrees, that funding will obviously form part of the 2020 and 21 estimates. That's going to be a mouthful. And at that point in time, we'll be able to progress that.
Alderman James. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, the current state of play with the installation of the fence at Anzac Park.
Graham, are you able to update us there, please?
Not specifically where we are with that one. I know we've got an Aboriginal Heritage review of that area, but I'll provide a brief to.
Is there any timeline involved through you to Mr. Graham about this, because it has been itemised and regarded as a high-risk development, so we obviously need to do the best we can to meet the consultants.
General Manager, would like to speak to this?
Oh, thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alderman James. In terms of where this project is at, we need to submit a DA to Council. The fences at both locations will require a DA. Because of the nature of both sites, they also require an Aboriginal Heritage Assessment. That's been organised. We have only a certain amount of capacity in terms of influencing the time frame, but we'll be working with relevant officers in other organisations to expedite that as soon as we can.
Thanks very much. My second question is in relation to, and I was going to raise it in under the weekly briefing report section of Council with regard to Begonia Street and the GH&D report that was circulated in the weekly briefing report of the 6th of January. So my question through you, Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Graham in his capacity as Group Manager. Mr. Graham, it seems as though that when we read this report, it's sort of it's a even Stevie, 50 cents each way on the thing. It just doesn't really state categorically that the road needs to be sealed. There doesn't need. There's no on page 15 of 28. If Begonia Street were to be sealed, it's expected that any increase in rat running is most likely to occur during the morning peak in the westbound direction, and any other traffic calming measures seem to have been sort of given the flick, if you want to put it in those sort of terms. So look, is this sort of a thing that's just going to sort of disappear and there's no action taken on it? Or is there some positive, concrete determination that will come back to Council to determine as to whether there needs to be sealing of Begonia and or any traffic calming measures?
Through Mr. Mayor, intention is to undertake a workshop in February with Alderman to explain, because this was just the Council, I think they did notice a motion requesting origin destination data, which the GHG report has undertaken. We've done further work in terms of recommendations of upgrades in the intersections further to the west, and we'll present all that information in February.
Thank you. Alderman Warren.
I'd like to preface my question by saying that one of the problems that has been raised most often with me in regard to Rosny Hill and Kangaroo Boulevard is traffic management. I understand that a traffic management study is being carried out at the moment, and we're up to phase 2 on that. My question is, when will that be available? Will it be made public, and will it be available in time to inform our decisions on those major developments?
Perhaps Mr. Lovell or Mr. Graham?
Through Mr. Mayor, we've received, I've been advised by our traffic engineer, we've received the report from GHD in terms of this was a further follow-up on work and was workshopped with council the previous year in terms of the CBD area and traffic modelling. We asked them to go around and look at various solutions. Again, I'll be looking at coming to council in February in terms of that and an update of the parking survey that was undertaken in December last year. Aim will be to update council on possible improvements to managing the parking and traffic through the CBD area.
And second question, in light of some of the discussions this evening on bushfire management, I'd like to request that, again, when we have that workshop, that we do look at a range of solutions. I notice, with all due respect to the General Manager, there is a difference between hazard reduction and backburning, and rural people get really upset when you confuse the two, in that backburning is something that takes place during a fire. Hazard reduction is a preventative measure, and I would urge you to get to look at a full range of things beyond hazard reduction, because as all the experts are telling us, that's no longer enough. So if we could
So the question is,
could we have a range of options presented to us to help educate and inform us as to what else can be done to mitigate bushfires in the current catastrophic environment where we're having more intense, more frequent bushfires?
Certainly. Okay, that to the members of the public, that concludes the open session of council. Unlike state and federal governments, we don't have cabinet to deal with sensitive matters, so we have to go into closed session. So thank you very much for your involvement tonight. Your attendance has been appreciated. Motion to go into closed session, please. Alderman Pearce, seconded Alderman Kennedy. All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Thank you.